Back in the U.S., a bipartisan task force visited Butler, Pennsylvania, and held a press conference today as the probe into former President Trump's assassination attempt back in July continues now. Joining us live to discuss this is Strategy Director of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the news commentary podcast, Can We Please Talk, Mike Leon. Mike, it's good to see you. It's been about a month and a half since the assassination attempt. Do you think this has had a lasting impact on the presidential race?
Well, good to see you guys, first and foremost. You know, I would have said yes back in July. And now all of a sudden, as you've looked at the last 4 or 5 weeks in American politics, it's just been so chaotic and so crazy. So many different firsts. Obviously, the assassination attempt of President Trump's life was the first time an assassination attempt had happened in 43 years since Ronald Reagan. Back in the 80s, you obviously had President Biden, who's an incumbent right now, deciding to step aside. You had the Democratic Party rallying around Vice President Kamala Harris. So many different things. The conventions have happened as well. A debate happened outside of the normal conventional norms of September, October, and the Committee on Presidential Debates. So it's been so chaotic. But I do think the assassination attempt, at least in the minds of voters, is still about safety, security. There's a larger conversation about gun violence and how this kid was able to get access to a gun. And I think this task force that has been put together by Democrats and Republicans show that we still can come to some sort of compromise and bipartisan work to figure out answers and solutions to issues that we saw where a former president of the United States almost lost his life on national television. So hopefully this will get some answers to all of this, but I still think it is on the top of minds of voters.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up this idea of the two parties coming together to figure this whole thing out. Now, right after the assassination attempt, there was really this discussion around toning down the rhetoric and bringing America together. Do you think that this has happened, and is it still happening?
That's a huge question, right? I mean, I want it to happen. I'm adding to it. You know, I in the subsequent days after the assassination attempt, for example, I had Congressman Dan Goldman on, who was drawing the ire of a lot of people in right-wing circles because of some of the comments he made back in November about former President Trump, saying, you know, he misspoke about eliminating former President Trump. And I had asked him about that, you know, point blank, like how does somebody who said something like that, even though you misspoke, how do you now message to Americans about lowering the temperature in the room, right? We all need to do our part on this. I think the first thing to do is we all need to have an acknowledgement of how we got here, one. I think the second part is, you know, like looking at this assassination attempt, we can't live in this conspiracy land about some of these things that have unfolded in American politics. Like there was somebody that lost their life on that day. There's people that have been injured. I know members of Congress that were there that day and ones that are on the task force that are going to be involved in this. So I think lowering the temperature comes with all of us admitting our faults and then coming to the table and figuring out how we go forward from here. And so the way we go forward, and what I love about this task force, 13 members on it, you know, 6 Democrats, 7 Republicans, all coming together to realize that there's a larger issue at hand here, and it's protecting our public figures. And then we can have the conversations break off from that about how we get access to guns and how the public gets access to guns and things like that, because that's part of this larger conversation as well, as how this kid was able to get access to a weapon.
Very interesting point you make there. And you mentioned all of these different players in this whole situation. RFK Jr., he just lost Secret Service protection after finally getting it after the assassination attempt. How significant is his dropping out and backing Trump to this race and everything that's been going on right now?
You know, it's so interesting looking at RFK from a distance and happening to know his advisors and people around his campaign. You know, I work at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, where we've done some work with him, and he was a part of the debate series that we've put on with the third-party candidates, including Jill Stein and Libertarian candidate Chase Oliver. So I have gotten to know him from afar and here and there through the different people that work for him. And I think all along, at least I had been very vocal about this, just speaking to RFK voters in different focus groups. They were always either the couch or they were in Trump camp. And it's mainly because of some of the things that RFK has championed that kind of aligned with the MAGA platform. So seeing him walk across the street, the proverbial street, and align himself with former President Trump doesn't surprise me as somebody who's been following it. Now, will it move voters? The biggest thing that I can outline is Arizona is where President Trump had that rally and where RFK showed up at. Why? Because Arizona has 35% of registered independent voters, over 1.5 million. RFK was registered as an independent. The razor-thin margin in 2020 of under 20,000 votes in that state. Somebody like an RFK could potentially tip the scales. I know he said he's taking his name off the ballot in 10 key states. Arizona, I think, is going to be one of those states that he outlined. But still, him endorsing somebody could move the needle in either direction. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the actions of the campaign as they did this event in conjunction in this battleground state of Arizona. There's a reason behind that, right? And so I do think him dropping at this time, especially with these next 7-8 weeks before early voting starts, was very pivotal for the Trump campaign for sure.
I like how you bring up this idea of these shifting dynamics right now in the presidential race. There is, as you mentioned, RFK Jr.'s stepping back and support for Trump. And we also just saw the Democratic National Convention just ended. So keeping that one in mind, how do you summarize the overall dynamics of the current presidential race now?
Again, another good question. I think that the race right now, like, again, from what you saw on June 28th to what you've seen right now, where you saw the ascension of Trump in the polls, you saw Democratic members of Congress resign to a potential second Trump term, to now all of a sudden over these last 6 weeks, Democrats rallying around one central candidate. I just had Congressman Glenn Ivey and asked him about this, are you shocked at how fast your party has been able to regroup and kind of reframe the message? And he even admitted, yeah, a little shocked, because he was a staunch Biden supporter because of policies, but he couldn't defend the debate performances and his age. And so right now, the overarching thing is, we still have weeks into early voting. Kamala Harris has begun an ascension, but I do think it is pivotal for her, without diving into the buzzwords and phrases around this. I do think it is pivotal for her to talk to the media, and the media being a press conference. One, because Donald Trump has done one, he's done a few of them, but two, doing it with one central outlet just doesn't cover all of the outlets that could ask her the potential questions that are on the minds of voters. So I think, to summarize it all, Kamala Harris has ascended, and the former president right now just has not been able to reframe his message. He needs to focus on failures of the administration and not grievance politics of what happened to him in the past. And if he does that, he could potentially cut the margin, and an endorsement of RFK could help in that regard as well.
Yeah, some very interesting points you make there. And I think this is a very interesting election cycle. So many unexpected changes. We'll really have to keep in tune and see what happens next. Mike Leon, director of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the News Commentary podcast. Can we please talk? Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.